Okay, so when we open it up, we have a scene that looks like this. And basically what it consists of is a ground plane that we're using to catch the shadow, a backplate to help us position our photo and try our best to match the point of view, a key light, which is the primary directional source, and a fill dome, which is just a kind of just a fill of color to emulate a sky or a room. Now, once again, if we were to do this in a professional context, this would be much more complex. But for now, this is what we're going to use. Okay, so just to see what's happening here, if I go to the eyeball, render view, hit play, we have our object and it's casting a shadow on the plane, which kind of makes it feel like it's in this scene. We've batched the perspective. Okay. So the best way to understand how this works is to grab a different photo. So to do that, I'm going over to Unsplash. Okay, so I downloaded this folder here. I'm sorry, this file here. I'm going to open it up in Photoshop. And I'm going to turn this into a smart object. I'm going to set my canvas to 1920 by 1080. If you don't set it to this exact aspect ratio and resolution, it's not going to work. And I'm going to take it, scale it down, move it up. And then I'm going to save a copy in my Maya project source images, and you can call it whatever. Maybe like background demo. And for this, we want it to be a TIFF. So we just keep introducing file formats. They all have their pros and cons. The nice thing about TIFFs is that both Photoshop and Maya can read TIFFs. So we can keep our layers and color corrections and kind of be able to go back and forth between the two. So background underscore demo dot TIFF. All right. Okay, now over in Maya, we're going to change the background and the shadow. And to do that, we need to update the plate in two different places. And to get to those places, I'm going to the hypershade, which hopefully you've been exploring as part of your homework. Just going to hide the outliner and the channel box just to get a little room. Okay, so the first one is the texture, and this is going to change the backplate for this shadow catcher over here. And so I hit File, and I point it to our new background demo. Cool. And we see that nothing's happened, because this is only going to show up in the render. The other spot we need to update it is in Camera, Image Plane, and all right, and if we want to see how that's going, I hit play. And there we go. All right, so it's on the hill. It's maybe not quite the right point of view, maybe not the right color, maybe not the light direction and whatever, but at least it's working. Okay, so the next thing we're going to want to do is position the camera as best we can to match the perspective and point of view as we have in the scene here. Now, the focal length, which we talked about in the lecture, I'm going to eyeball it. I'm going to kind of look at these lines and see how it feels relative to the subject. When you're shooting your own imagery, you can actually plug in the number from the camera, whatever focal length you're using, and be one step closer. But for now, we're just going to use our eyes, and I'm going to go like this. Another thing is the object itself. I have this placeholder object, but what you could do is bring in the same thing you exported to the 3D printer. So if I go import, files to print. Sweet and acidic. All right. Here, maybe group it, right, and scale it up to fit. Should be pretty nice. But I'm sticking with the ampersand for now. Okay, so I got the angle pretty good. I might want to just scale this up a bit. All right, something like that. Maybe move it over a little. All right, and then see how we're doing. Okay, so the position's better, but the color and light are not quite there yet. Okay, so as we progress, I'm adding more and more complexity to these things. So before we just had one null to control the lighting, but now that we're getting a little bit more particular about it, I have two. So one only controls the Y, and the other one only controls the X. So if I try to do the Z here, like it's not going to do anything. It's only going to let me do the X. And this is so that I can really methodically try to match the angle of the light in here. So to do that, I'm going to have a render cooking. And I'm looking at the shadow here. And the angle. So it's pretty low in the sky. And it's kind of turn around a little bit more. Something like that. Okay, the other thing we're noticing about it is the shadow is way too soft, right? Because in my example image, it was maybe a little later in the day, maybe a little hazier sky, and so, or maybe the sun was going through the clouds, so the light source was actually bigger. In this one, it's more of a focus light, and if we remember, the size relative to the subject controls how sharp the lighting becomes. And now see the shadow's a lot more sharp. Okay, we have a few other things we can play with though. If I go to the attribute editor, I have my color of the light. And so before in my example that loads with the scene, I drop from the sunset, and this one I'm going to just find kind of a bright moment, hit play, and we can see it kind of adds a little more blue and brightens everything up. We can always tweak the intensity to match our scene as well. All right. And then I also have, so that's the key light, the main light source. I have this fill, which is just a dome of color. And so for that, I'm going to grab something that would be like the fill color and click that in there. And then I can season to taste, right? There's some fill in there from the sky. I'm just going to add it just based on what I'm looking at until it seems about right. All right, not too bad. I could kind of noodle on this for a bit. I'm going to just make the angle of the light a little more. That. Okay, cool. So next, I'm noticing that the shadow's getting cut off. So if you look here, there's the shadow catcher, which is just a plane. And you can make it if you need to. And in some instances, it's not going to be a problem. But if you need to, I can just extend it so that the shadow doesn't get cut off. There we go. That looks a little better. Okay, so now we have it in the scene, but we want to be able to color correct it in Photoshop, and we want a mask so that we can kind of mask this little person out and position things in here and just have a little more flexibility. So to do that, you go to your shot cam, channel box, and you change this parameter that I've created for you, setup versus render. You go from 0, which is off, which is setup, to 1, which is render, which is on. And so now it looks a little weird, but what's happening is if I cycle through these channels here, now it's generating a matte. So So we'll let this cook for a second. I'm going to go File, Save Image. And I think, you want to name things in a way that makes sense. So we have architectural, human scale, and object scale. So I'm going to call this architectural _ my initials, which are PA. And then this is important now, .png. Otherwise, it's just going to save it as a JPEG and it won't embed the alpha, which we really want. We want that alpha. We want the transparency. Okay, save, replace. And if we go over to the Finder, context, we saved it in images. I hit space and it's a good start.